let's get into this. It is a story that I spent a year working towards on my blog, and Douglas has, in his infinite wisdom, renamed it for me, or at least this section, and it's called "Coming Out to Jimmy Swaggart in a Pantsuit." In the summer of '91, after almost 20 years spent working the land, my father had given up, restructured his debt, and set off to find a new way to support our family. My mom and dad had lost the farm, and I had to move out of my first apartment and get a second part-time job. I'd been given two options: come home and work for my dad, or go to a junior college to earn a degree. The choice was easy. As I packed my things, I planned on never going back to the Delta, save for the holidays. My mother had insisted that I attend a conservative Southern Baptist college, despite my logical arguments for attending a community college until I knew what I could do with myself. Realizing now I could start over with real direction, I rolled headfirst into my new life. Over the previous several months, I had begun to let myself consider what it meant to be openly gay. Before the bankruptcy, I figured I'd better fight to fit in and do my best to be like everyone else. After the bankruptcy, virtually on my own and faced with a new beginning, being myself didn't seem as daunting. That was the moment of inception for me. That was the jumping off place that led me to where I am today, in a long-term relationship, co-owner of a gay-owned small business, and hopefully living proof that my partner and I aren't much different from the rest of the world. That fall, I began class at Hines Community College, where I studied graphic design and met my first boyfriend. He was 19. I imagined we were going to be together forever, and nothing could change my mind. He, having been married, was still semi-closeted, and when friends asked if we were a couple, I coyly referred that question to him. I also began to come out to friends and classmates. It was difficult at first, but each telling of my truth became easier. I never faced judgment, which surprised me. But one friend asked in a serious tone, "Doesn't your butt hurt?" That was the first time I realized people had ridiculous preconceived notions about what it meant to be gay. I knew there would be those who would spew scripture and or hate, but I never entertained having to explain that I didn't plan to be a girl, a drag queen, or a drug-addicted alcoholic AIDS patient, as they all seem to think. My boyfriend and I ventured out to the clubs a couple of times. We'd talk about making gay friends, but that never really happened. His being secretive about our relationship led me to becoming irrationally jealous. Everyone was a threat in my eyes, and he seemed content to live in secret. I became possessive and inconsolable when we couldn't be together all the time. The sad thing is, almost like an out-of-body experience, I could see what I was doing, but seemed unable to stop it. By the following summer, I was out to everyone but my family. I decided that there was no reason to bring that shame on them. I decided to live a double life that kept my parents and siblings at arm's length. I figured what they didn't know couldn't hurt them. I'd never have to break my mother's heart. She'd never have to beg my father not to beat my ass and throw me out. There'd never be conflict between siblings and their future spouses. I'd never give them reason to suspect a thing. Sure, I'd still be living a sort of lie, but some lies, I convinced myself, were worth telling. Headstrong and naive, I went down that road, picking up souvenirs, sprinkling lies and half-truths along the way. What I didn't know was my mother had begun to piece together a timeline of sorts. Like a private detective, she compiled a list of corners into which I painted myself, and she patiently waited to confront me. The following summer, 9 months into my first relationship, I was dumped. For all the reasons there were to be together, there were more that drove us apart. 2 kids, each trying to figure out what it meant to be gay in a world before Will and Grace. Had little but the token homosexual, on the real world for direction. When after weeks of begging, phone calls, and stalking my beloved failed, I accepted my situation, dropped out of school, and spiraled into a depression that lasted longer than I'd care to admit. I ran with a pack of gay acquaintances at the bars, danced my ass off literally, and drank too much. I flirted, kissed, and fooled around with several guys, but I just couldn't get over my first. I continued beating myself up for running him off, and ultimately tipped my mother off in a way that only happens in movies. Mother furrowed her brow and spoke in a quiet, apologetic tone. Son, we can't figure out how to help with your tuition and your apartment. I knew what was coming next. She continued, I know it's not ideal, but we want you to move home. You can commute to school from here. Just like that, I lost my foothold in Jackson. To be honest, I was exhausted with life as it was. Buying groceries with my mother's Savon card was less than glamorous, and I'd stopped going out as often, choosing to sit in my darkened apartment and smoke, torturing myself with Celine Dion ballads. I'd managed to get enrolled in school without my parents discovering I dropped out the previous semester, but scrambling to cover up that secret was a hefty burden. Driving an hour and a half for school sounded dreadful, but I decided I could do anything for a year if it helped me move on. Less than 2 years after coming out, falling in love, and starting a new life, I packed up my studio apartment and limped home with my gay tail between my legs. I took a part-time job at the kitchen at the Humphreys County Country Club. There I cooked dinner and Sunday lunch for members. While I chopped, sautéed, washed dishes, and cleaned up after reception, my mind was always on Jackson. One day, I told myself, I'll get out of here. I'll be successful and someone will have me. On occasion, I'd make the drive to town for a random Sunday at Jaded or beer bust at JC's, Jackson's gay bars. Always looking and ever hopeful, I longed to find the one. Friends introduced me to other gays, but none seemed right. During this time, I was introduced to a guy that I thought was kind of cute. I'd seen him on the dance floor the first night of my first visit to a gay bar. He was one of the cool gays, and I immediately deemed him unobtainable. He turned out to be just another in a string of hot messes that always seemed to be around at closing time. One sunny afternoon, just when I'd resolved to keep moving ahead, I ran into my first love by chance. It was an awkward exchange during which I struggled with the urge to be hateful and the overwhelming need to throw myself at his feet. In the end, I walked away with the feeling that I should be as happy as he, so I faked it. A few days later, in a fit of stupidity, I whipped into a florist and I sent him flowers. It's nothing, I told myself. It's a gesture, innocent. And who knows, he might fall in love with me again. Someone on Madison Avenue better be rolling in the dough for making floral delivery the answer to life's problems. Lost your job? Have some flowers. Dried up ovaries? Have some flowers. Stigmatized, unable to forget your first love, and pathetic as a cat turd? Send him flowers. When I got back to the Delta, my mother greeted me. Quickly, I recognized the look on her face. I'd seen it when I was a child. It was disappointment rolled in disgust, and she aimed it at me with ease. She sat in a chair, legs crossed, without so much as a hello or how was your day. This came as a shock to me. My mother was the veritable Donna Reed of the Mississippi Delta. She was known throughout the Delta as one of the few who had not only the means, but the unbridled talent to both organize any social gathering required in advance or at the last minute. No one knew, but Mother always had the essentials in the cupboard. She could throw together a catfish Creole or fling a kebab on the grill. To say the least, when she set her mind to it, she only needed 15 minutes to set up a gathering, God knows how many times Mother stood up and invited the entire congregation back to our home for a mixer just after Sunday night service. In Mississippi, the hospitality state, she made it look easy. But at that particular moment, I did not feel welcome in my own home. "Son," she said, "have a seat." As I sat, my mind locked on the reason for the talk, and I knew the jig was up. You see, I had given an emergency number in case there was any trouble delivering the flowers. I'd foolishly assumed everyone knew where this art department was, and as we now know, they had trouble finding it. What's this about flowers for your friend?" she uttered through tightened lips, like salacious gossip. "What?" I asked. She tilted her head and squinted. "The flowers you sent that boy." I pressed on. "I don't know what you're talking about." She sat back in her chair, crossed her arms. "We're going to have a long talk with your father tonight," she said calmly. "We'll get to the bottom of this. You mark my words." I found myself standing in the middle of my room, unaware that I'd even left her. I quickly scanned for things I couldn't live without. What I couldn't fit in my trunk, I didn't need. There was no question in my mind how this would end. I'd have to tell my truth once more. My father, a peaceful man for the most part, would physically toss me out of the house. Mother, clinging to his ankle, would be dragged along the driveway yelling, "Wallace, don't hurt him! No, Wallace!" And my siblings, driven from slumber by the commotion, would witness me stealing my car as dust billowed behind me on my way back to Jackson. My father knocked on the door. "Your mama said we need to talk. Are you okay, son?" I could tell he had no idea what was going on. My mother wasn't just leading me to slaughter. My father was along for the ride as well. In one evening, his boy would become a queer and dead to him very soon after. As I followed him downstairs, I replayed what I thought would happen over and over in my mind. There would be the telling, the ass whipping, and the exile. My father has always been a pretty level-headed man. I've only seen him lose his temper once. I was a kid, no more than 10 years old. My aunt owned what we call a country store, just down from our small home. A crowd had gathered around the hole in the wall. When I approached, I saw a disheveled man pushed from the doorway and down to the gravel parking lot, my father hot on his heels. The scuffle ended with the man apologizing over and over for what he'd done. The crowd dispersed, and my father stood red-faced, holding his twin sister Wilma as she wept. I learned later that the man, drunk and belligerent, had groped my aunt and pinned her behind the counter. My father had come to her rescue, but the image of my father, filled with rage, hitting another man, was burned into my brain. I sat in an oversized queen chair, feet flat on the ground. My sweaty hands were crammed under my legs, helping me feel grounded, almost safe. I thought I might slip from gravity's hold and drift off into the dark Delta sky. If I concentrate, I can disappear into this ugly upholstery, I thought. Mother had taken her place on the sofa to my left, and Pop was in his recliner to my right. My father's back placed him in one of two places, the recliner or flat on his back on the floor with his big pillow. I sat in the middle. My mother glared at me with cold eyes, and I could feel no emotion from her at all. "Tell him," she quipped. "Tell your father the truth." Pop looked from my mother to me with confusion. "Tell me what, son?" he implored. I began to sob. I felt the life slipping from me as I willed my body deeper into the chair. I knew there would be no relief in the telling, no weight lifted from my shoulders, and certainly no healing in this truth. Slowly, in a voice as small as a whisper, I uttered what would surely break my father's heart. "I'm gay." There was a loud clap that made my eyes spring open. My mother had produced a Bible and had begun to slap it repeatedly. She was on her feet now, and the scripture and hate were flowing from her clenched teeth, as if she were speaking in tongue. I never expected to be yelled at by my sweet mother. She was my safe haven, my protector. Before my very eyes, my defender transformed into Jimmy Swaggart in a pantsuit. "We didn't raise you to become a queer," she yelled. "This is not God's plan. You've got the devil in you, and I'm not going to let him have you." My father looked on, still confused by what I'd said. Then just as quickly as Mother had turned on me, my father spoke, and I'll never forget what he said. "Shut up, Bonnie," he yelled as he pointed at her. I didn't grow up in a home that got loud. We didn't fight or even have heated debates. There was only respectful dialogue around the dinner table. I had never even seen my parents disagree. Mother stood there, the Bible hanging by her side, her mouth agape. "Wallace!" "Shut up," I said. Then in what can only be described as the most powerful moment I've had in my entire life, my father got out of his recliner. He looked at me with the eyes of a parent, placed his oversized pillow at my feet, and lay down directly in front of me. "Son, tell me why you think you're gay."